Welcome back to another edition of Tuesday's Conversation. And I am so excited to have another wonderful guest to join me tonight to discuss a very important subject. My good friend and brother, Matthew Longmore, who is going to be here to have a generative conversation about the pressures of manhood. Now, of course, we recognize June as being Men's Mental Health Month. So I think it comes at quite an opportune time that we're able to finally sit down and have this conversation. Welcome. Say hi to the people.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm very excited about this conversation. We've been trying to have this conversation for like a year.
Yeah.
But here we are.
We're
here. We made it. Yeah. So for our audience, our viewers, I'll just set up that you come to this conversation with, of course, a wealth of expertise and information because you are a registered social worker with a psychotherapy practice.
Yes.
And in that practice, you, of course, in our conversation, you shared that trauma, anxiety, depression, those are all within the realm of your practice. So I think you're well situated to jump into this conversation today.
Yes, thank you. Looking forward to it as well.
Yes. We had quite a bit of generative conversation in the pre-show, so this is going to be good. Let's get started. I would like for you to kind of share. I always like to set up a little bit of a foundation to the conversation. So maybe share with us what would be like your frequent flyers or your top two, top three, just the things that bring men into your office.
Yeah, good question. So I would say right off the bat, a lot of men that come to me do so because the women in their lives have highlighted some concerns and issues with their behaviors, them not being emotionally available enough, and sometimes it's due to anger, it could be infidelity, but I would say the common factor there is the women in their lives have highlighted there's a concern, and so they come because they want to either appease or they want to save the relationship. And they do have issues that they've never spoken about that they do want to work on. Okay. That's one.
All right.
Two, I see men who are, they're career driven. They have, on the outside would appear to be a good life, but they struggle internally with a lot of shame and just self-defeating thoughts, just the feeling of I'm not good enough. And so that will show up in different areas. So it can show up in their self-confidence. It shows up in even just like for them in relationships with potential partners, with, even just at work. So that feeling of shame and not good enough can even just affect their ability to strive for success because of that feeling of like, I don't know, imposter syndrome. Like, can I do this? Right. So that I would say is another one. And then as well, men who struggle with various addictions.
Okay.
Is another.
Talk to us about that.
So when I say addictions, we'll have a variety. I would say that the one that I see the most is pornography addictions.
Okay.
And that's tough because it's of sexual nature, and so a lot of times men, they can't talk to other men about that.
Right.
So that's something that I'll see men come in a lot for, especially those who are faith-based, who are in some kind of faith-based setting.
Faith community.
And I think just the stigma, the shame behind it, with also the conviction that they feel brings them to a point of, okay, I keep doing this, I'm in a cycle and I need help. Sometimes pastors, different ministers will come in and they're struggling and they can't talk to anybody else about it. So that's that's something I see quite often.
Okay. You said so much there, and one of the things that stood out to me in particular was about the self-confidence piece. I think it's well known that men are, from jump, taught to be, you gotta be confident, you gotta, come on, you gotta man up, you gotta be all these things.
Toughen up.
So when somebody's coming to you kind of suggesting that they have problems with their self-confidence, is it that they've identified that within themselves? Or is it just, I don't know, some other manifestations of it that you then have to say, I think you're struggling with a self-confidence issue? How does that unfold?
Yeah, good question. Sometimes it is that they've identified it within themselves.
Got it.
And for those men that come in that have identified it within themselves, it's easier to have the conversation of, okay, so where have you noticed this coming from?
Right.
What are, some of the issues surrounding these feelings? So yes, some of them have identified it. And I think for those who have identified it, they have in some way in their life have had someone who has said, it's okay to talk about problems.
Okay.
It's okay to talk about these issues. For the most part, they have, whether they've had some kind of mental health awareness campaign at work or something, but they realize, okay, here are some issues I noticed and I want to talk about it.
Okay.
There are others who it's been pointed out to them. And so they're coming more so reluctantly because someone's expecting that you go and work on this issue.
Yeah.
And usually if the stakes are too high for them to, remain the same, then they're going to be like, okay, I'll come
I'll go.
and I'll go, right? Which is a different conversation because now we have to create an atmosphere where it's shame-free, it's okay to talk about issues.
Yes.
Which is not quite the norm for a lot of men.
Right.
So a lot of times it takes a little while to delve in, build rapport, and then delve into the actual issues that.
That's an excellent sort of segue because I think it's well known. Generally speaking, men are not they are not encouraged to speak out.
Yes.
I don't even know if it's just a matter of the lack of encouragement as much as it is them not having a sense of comfort in doing that because that's not how they're, like trained and taught. And of course you would not a man, but these are kind of basic things. Like talk about that aspect of just not ever being trained or encouraged to speak on what's happening on the inside, and therefore you kind of have that suffering in silence syndrome thing.
Yeah, and a lot of it starts from childhood.
Okay.
As a child, a young boy, they have the same emotions that young girls have.
Okay.
Deal with fear, deal with anger,
Sadness.
Shame, sadness, all of the emotions that God has given us, they have.
Yeah.
But what happens is oftentimes the cultural norms or societal norms that are imposed on boys are that we're to be strong, we're to be tough,
right?
Don't be soft, man up. So when they bring these, as a young child, you'll know who can I go to, right? They're looking for who can I go to for safety, for validation, to open up. And when they go to a parent and the parent tells them like, stop the crying, you have nothing to cry for,
right?
Dry it up now.
Yeah.
What they're doing is they're pretty much severing this sense of self that is connected with our emotions, because that has a lot to do with how we see ourselves, how we express ourselves. So a lot of times young boys, once they're taught, don't share this part of you, you're essentially cutting that off. And now what you're doing is you have to perform in this, so it's almost like you're masking. So you're becoming more stoic, because men are supposed to be stoic, strong. So you're pretending as though you don't have this pain on the inside. And that can, the longer you do that, you can even, like, you numb that to the point that you don't even recognize it's there.
Wow.
And that can be dangerous. So that's kind of like the starting point. It's usually in childhood,
Mm-hmm.
the messaging that we hear, that gotta be strong, gotta be tough, you don't show emotions. So emotions are seen either as irrelevant or they're seen as an enemy that you need to either conquer,
Wow.
or if it's too big, avoid.
Let me sit with that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I have to sit with that. Emotions are seen as an enemy
Mm-hmm.
that you need to either conquer or act like they don't exist.
Yes.
How does that manifest in adulthood? So this is what you're taught. You've learned this behavior in childhood, moved through it through adolescence, etc. You now become a man.
Mm-hmm.
If you've avoided, let's say that was the route that you took.
Right.
How does that manifest? Like, where
So
does that
that
lead
that will manifest when you're faced with different pressures. Let's say,
and we're gonna talk about
different
specific
pressures,
pressures.
right?
Yeah,
So let's say
yeah.
it is the pressure to be emotionally available. You're in a relationship
Okay, yeah.
and you have a woman who wants
Mm-hmm.
to share things that are bothering her about the relationship.
Yeah.
Maybe she feels you're not listening, you're always too busy. What happens is when you start to feel these emotions of like shame,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because now you're feeling like, okay,
Called out.
I'm being called out,
Yeah.
not good enough, failure. What happens is you now go into avoidance mode.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an emotion. So this shame is an emotion that I once had as a child, but I remember when I had it, I wasn't allowed to bring it out. So you hide. Shame
Yes.
is hide, like usually leads to hiding.
Yeah.
So you start to shut down. You don't talk. You either leave the house
Okay.
or you leave the conversation. You're present physically, but mentally, emotionally checked out.
Mm-hmm.
You're avoiding these emotions. For some men, that can turn into you're looking for a place to escape. So some men bury themselves in work because they're trying to avoid their emotions. Some men buried at the gym.
Okay.
Some men, a bit more
in the man cave.
In the man cave. Some turn to alcohol. Some
Yeah.
turn to. These are where the addictions start to manifest because they want an escape. There's too much pressure,
Mm-hmm.
and getting into something like porn,
Yes.
or drinking, it gives them an escape where they don't have to sit with those emotions. I can get different kind of emotions that are more pleasant, are easier to manage. Those heavy ones that I don't want to see, I can just get rid of them.
What you just said, the drinking, the porn, whatever the addiction is, those vices
Mm-hmm.
are pretty clear as far as when a person veers down that direction, they're not in a good place. But it makes me wonder, especially for the faith community,
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to say, well, I don't have any of those problems. I don't avoid. But is it possible that there are other avenues of avoidance that even a person of faith who is not engaging in those types of things, but maybe they're burying themselves in?
Yes. And
Bible
unfortunately,
studies
they can bury themselves in ministry.
Come on.
So
Come on.
ministry becomes an escape from the realities of the life that you're supposed to be living but are not. And that's where, the scripture talks about the one who doesn't provide for his own home is worse than an infidel.
Yes.
Providing is more than financial provision, right? Emotional provision is something that men are called to do.
Teach the people.
And so what happens is when you can't provide what you don't have.
Wow.
And so when you're not able to provide that safety, that emotional safety that your family is demanding of you, in their eyes, you're seen as someone who is absent, as someone who's just avoidant. But when you have an outlet like ministry, where people are looking up to you, and people are, wow, that's so deep, and you're so positive and so
Yes.
encouraging, you find this escape where you don't have to deal with your issues, but you can, on the other hand, receive praise and receive, adoration
Yes.
and acceptance. And this is something that you desperately are craving. And so this is where now you justify ministry.
Got
This
it.
person really needs me. This person is sick. They need me to be there.
Got it.
So ministry can be a big thing. But like I said, and the more that you are, let's say, I know you mentioned Bible study, you get into the word, but now you're using the word as almost like a hiding place.
Yeah.
So you hide behind scriptures.
Yeah.
You find, we can become very manipulative because we can take it and use it to justify what we're doing, but that's really just for safety's sake. That's because we feel threatened and we're using this as a way to provide safety from something that we feel is a threat.
I want to segue because that word safety is so big. We talk about it a lot in emotional safety as it pertains to women, but what you're saying clearly, men need emotional safety too.
Yes, definitely.
So with that, and again, we want to kind of highlight the pressures of manhood. I don't even know where to start as far as how do you first of all define that? Because it sounds like when a person is under pressure, pressure in and of itself is almost the antithesis of safety.
Yes.
Right? But help us break down. What do you mean like manhood pressure? You're not under pressure, you make more money than women, you're stronger. What do you mean?
See, that right there is a part of the pressure. It's like you don't have anything to complain about.
Right.
So the pressure to remain strong under, all of these things that men deal with. So for example, men are expected to lead in the homes. We're expected to be providers. We're expected to be protectors. And so with those roles comes the demands, right? The different demands of those roles. So to be the provider, when, for example, you may have different things happening at work where maybe you have a boss that there's microaggressions, there's different things that you're experiencing that are causing you to feel overwhelmed, frustrated, but you have to keep showing up. You can't take a mental health day because men don't struggle with mental health. We should have it put together. So one of the pressures is to be strong regardless of. So no matter what you're going through, you need to be strong. So I know men, they gloat or boast in that they've never taken a sick day. They've worked their whole life.
Yeah.
And they find that as a sense of accomplishment.
Badge of honor.
Right? It's a badge of honor that I never had to rest.
It's true.
I never had to stop. Right? And so that's a part of the pressures that a lot of men experiences. You need to be strong always. You need to provide, you need to protect. And when we're not able to do that, we feel as though we're less than, we're not enough. And while doing those things, we need to do it without showing any weakness. So it's not just providing, it's not just protecting, it's how we're doing that. We need to do that without crying. So if we do have some form of pain on the inside, we need to mask that pain. That's another pressure, is to mask your pain. Because if you don't, you're seen as weak. Now you're no longer a man.
Just to pause on that, point of the seeing as weakness, because especially in the household context, in terms of providing all the things, you are really the hero. You're required to be the hero to many. If there's children in the equation, you're required to be the savior, so to speak, based on norms, based on expectations. So I would imagine that adds to, again, the pressure.
It does add to the pressure. And if you don't have a space to talk about what you're going through, and if it's socially unacceptable to do that, then a lot of these things are bottled up. And you're expected, once let's say you get home from work, it's a long day, and let's say you have a physical job, so it's very, taxing on the body, and you really just want to rest. But when you get home, there's another shift. Because there's, let's talk about what happened today. Maybe it's the children, like this, this person said this about me, they hurt me, and they're expecting you to have a solution. And at that time, what you really want is space, but they're looking for solutions.
Right.
Right? And so in that moment, you feel this extra pressure. I have to do something about this.
Mm-hmm.
This is where a lot of times men are, they're overwhelmed, they're overworked, they're burdened, but they're not speaking. And sometimes how it will manifest is physically.
Okay.
Right? Because stress is physical. Stress shows up in the body.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Worry is in the mind.
Yes.
Anxiety is an emotion.
Okay.
Stress is a physical manifestation. Right? So it will show up in our heart. We might have heart palpitations, things like this. But oftentimes, because we go back to men are to be strong, don't talk about any of your issues, they won't go to the doctor. They're carrying all of this pain, all of this pressure, and they're just not speaking about it.
So Matthew, not to cut you off, but
that's fine.
When anything is under pressure, okay, and it's being bottled up and it's being contained, there is bound to be a breaking point.
Definitely.
How do we help our men? Because that's what we're trying to do, is to really help everyone, really, but our focus is on men right now. How do you keep from getting to that breaking point? How do you even know that that's what's happening?
Right.
How do you, is there some measure of self-awareness that has to take place first? How do you even know
that you're getting to that point?
Yeah.
And for a lot of men, we don't have a safe space where we can talk about these issues. So, and we haven't been raised with language to even identify when we're reaching a point of burnout.
Okay.
So it starts with awareness. Being able to understand, okay, a lot of times looking at what we're carrying in the body. For me, oftentimes I'll do a body scan just to see, okay, what am I carrying in my body? Because that's where we carry a lot of the pain that we're going through, because there's a mind and body connection. So I'll just explain this. So even whenever there's a threat, so any kind of perceived threat, if I feel that someone's about to attack me, without me asking my brain to do this, I will go into a fight or flight mode. So I will begin to, my heart will start to beat faster, my body starts to pump adrenaline, because what it's saying is I'm trying to prepare you to run or to fight. So I'll feel that in my hands, I'll feel it in my feet, my hands might start to sweat. All of these things are helpful when there's an actual threat, because we're getting everything we need to fight. The blood pumping through our hands makes sense if you gotta fight something that's attacking you. But what happens is that same response can take place when we're at home and our wife yells at us. There's this sense of perceived threat, and so we start to feel it in our body. We will feel our heart race, and depending on your personality, your life experiences, some men are more inclined to aggression, some men are more inclined to avoidance. But you'll feel this in your body, you'll feel your chest, you'll feel all these things happen. And that is a clue or a sign that I'm feeling unsafe right now. For me, as I said, I do body scans, so I'll sense it. If I recognize that my shoulders are tense, I know that my body is carrying some kind of pressure. And so I'll try and do things to help relax my body, whether that's just tensing and relaxing. It helps put my body in a more relaxed state, which helps me deal with pressure a lot better. Right? The calmer you can stay under pressure, the better. So that's one thing I would say, is noticing what's happening in your body. A lot of men have no relationship with they have no idea what's happening with their body until it's like, boom, they either hit something or they might punch a hole in the wall. They didn't realize like the whole time something was brewing on the inside. But if we're able to take a step back to say, okay, what's happening in my body? What could this mean?
I think that goes back to that self-awareness.
Self-awareness.
But you have to take time to stop and pause. And it's not just men. I think women, we can take a
For
page
sure.
from that as well. Pause and let me see what's going on. How did something make me feel or not feel, and that kind of thing. Okay.
Right.
So I want to, in the line of kind of helping men, because we talk about all these pressures, even just as you said, the pressure to provide, like that's so big. And in these, high inflationary streets, with everything it's the price of everything has gone up. It's a huge deal right now.
Yes.
I can imagine whether you're newer in your profession or younger men trying to come up and stabilize themselves. That's like something that weighs on them on a day-to-day basis. Can you share a little bit? Maybe speak to the person who's in that spot, right, in that space right now, and feeling the pressure of having to provide.
Yeah.
Like, how do you balance that, knowing that you have to do it, but also recognizing it's tough right now?
Yeah. I think first recognizing that it's okay to not be okay.
Wow.
It's okay to not always be strong.
That's good.
It's okay to not always be rich. It's okay to not always have the answers. That has to be a message that comes internally, right? We have to be able to accept that. Because if we don't, then we're constantly going to feel like we're a failure, which brings in an added layer of shame. And so we're tense. We're showing up into every conversation, relationship just tense because we're carrying all that. So I think the first thing is to validate that, okay, this is the situation that I'm in, and I'm not going to judge myself for it. It's okay, right? So having some self-compassion, okay, this is okay. After being able to just validate that it's okay, looking at, okay, all right, what are my options? Okay. But I like to approach things from a place of curiosity instead of criticism. Okay. So when I approach things with curiosity, I'm asking, okay, how did I get here? Okay. What's happening for me? What's changed? I want to, speaking out to the economy, is this my fault? Or is there something bigger than me that is difficult to navigate for a lot of people? Okay. Because a lot of men will come in and they'll say they're not making enough and they need to earn more and they're just so stressed like they're not doing enough. Okay. Without asking the question, is there something more to this? Right. Once you recognize, okay, this is where things are at and now you're looking for your options, I find, okay, what are my supports? What resources do I have? Because sometimes we can tap into resources, but because of the shame, right, of asking for help. Shame and or pride. Yeah. Right? And pride sometimes is just, it's a protective mechanism for shame. Yeah. Oh, wow. Right? And so for those of us who are faith-based, we know then that we see someone in the beginning of the Bible talks about in Genesis, Adam and Eve, after the sin, what Adam did was he felt shame and he felt fear, but that's not what he wanted to portray, right? Coming from a place of perfection, he wants to portray perfection at all times. So what he does is he hides behind leaves that still look perfect, that haven't been touched by the condition of sin. And he's hiding behind something that makes him appear to be righteous and makes him appear to be good. And what that says is that it's like this. Now, when I start to identify with what I'm hiding behind, there's where the pride comes in, right? And so the pride becomes an answer for shame. Wow. So if God sees me hiding behind these leaves, it's not so bad. But when I have to remove them, when I have to remove my career, when I have to remove my, the ministry and all of that, the facade, that's where the shame is. The pride oftentimes is deeper than what it looks like. Right. So I think being able to now look at how can I navigate this? Is there someone I can ask for support? Is there someone, resources, right? And, that may be a family member. That may mean I need to move back in with my parents for a year or two, if they're open to it, and just look at, okay, is that okay to do? And what's wrong with it?
So I was just gonna say, let's keep it real here, okay? Absolutely, every person, every individual on the face of the earth needs help at some point. But especially for men, isn't that like that very starting point? Isn't that a mountain, a pressure?
100%. 100%.
Like,
and let's be real, like it's a pressure for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
One, it depends on who you're going to help for, because they may use that against you. They may have a lot to say before they provide that help. Okay. If they even provide that help. So all of that, a man is already anticipating. So, and having that conversation and the back and forth before they even get there. So 100% it is a mountain. And just that internal feeling of like, how am I here? Like, how did I get here? Yeah. And it's hard because we don't accept ourselves. And there's a lot of self-rejection and self-hate. And what that leads to is a man, again, hiding, trying to just figure it out on their own, and then making a lot of mess of things.
Got it.
So it's being able to recognize I am human, I make mistakes, I'm flawed, and I will need help. Right? Like, I just find it so intriguing that even the way we're designed, not one of us can ever say, I have seen myself face to face. We need a mirror. We need another person to tell us what our face looks like.
That's good.
We need help, right? This is the reality. I could tell you what your face looks like. You could tell me what my face looks like, but I don't know until I've either heard from you or I've found a reflection somewhere.
Wow.
So we need other people. And I think it's so being able to one, come to the realization that, okay, I am human. I need help. I'm not weak for asking for help. And so having that conversation first with ourselves and normalizing that and validating that is important for men.
I want to stay right there at that point, like just the notion of asking for help. And particularly for those of us in the faith community. When we get to that place where we're like, okay, I need help. And you may not readily have, community that you've either yet tapped into or know somebody who's trusting enough. But I'm a believer. And this is another point I want us to take away. We as believers are not always going to have things together. Okay, we don't always have, it's not the picture of perfection, as you said. So I need to go to the Lord. But I don't even know where to start. I don't know what I'm like.
Yes.
Help me to make that jump. Help us to make that jump from...
You might have to crawl to get there, because when I say crawl, because sometimes some of the issues start in our childhood.
Oh, wow.
Where we may have grown up with a father who was emotionally absent. And so because of that, we couldn't bring our issues to our father. And if we did, maybe we would have been shamed for it or like figure it out on your own. And so what happens is that same feeling we now bring to our relationship with our Heavenly Father, right? It's hard for some men to make the distinction between my natural father and my spiritual father. And so when I come to God in prayer, I'm anticipating the same response that I would have gotten from my natural father. And so to ask for help, sometimes I don't know how to, or I feel ashamed, even though they say in the Bible, it says, cast your cares on me and, ask and it shall be given. I don't know how to do that. So when I come to this relationship with God, I now have to do a whole lot of unlearning before I can do the learning.
Yes. Okay.
There's some things that I need to put away before there's things that I can pick up. And so it's looking at, okay, who is this God? What is his character? What is his track record? And is it a fact or a feeling? Because you can go to God and you can feel like he's not listening because your earthly father didn't listen. But is it a fact or a feeling that he's not listening? what does his word say?
Yes.
Because if everything was created and sustained by his word, then his word is trustworthy. What does that say? And when I find it, now what I need to do is make the choice to believe it or not. Right? So it's looking at, how do I see God? And once you recognize who he is, it's going to him for who he is, not what you thought he was, or
would or
what
wouldn't
people
do.
would or wouldn't do.
Yeah.
It's looking at it from a different perspective and realizing he is a father and he wants us to approach him as the father, meaning we're in a position of dependence. In all the Old Testament, there were so many different names given to God. You know, the different Jehovah Jirehs and all of them. Rapha. There's different names given to God. He's seen as the, to Abraham, he appears as God Almighty. All of these different titles, right? But when it comes to the New Testament and Jesus starts to teach about God and prayer, he uses one title, Father.
That's so good.
When you approach him, it's not approaching him as God Almighty. It's coming and saying, our Father, because he's trying to develop a relationship that's based on connection, on safety and security, and on one where we are dependent on him. And so it's having a whole paradigm shift as men where we think we have to be God. We are the heroes, we're the saviors, and recognizing, no, it's okay to be a child without being childish.
Wow.
Right? We can come to God and say, this is my need. And he says, I want it. And I will help you when you come that way. So asking for help is actually a sign of strength in God's eyes. Because you've lifted your muscle to do something that I've commanded you to do.
You are freeing somebody right now. I'm telling you this. Just by encouraging that paradigm shift in how we see it. You do not have to be the hero.
Yes.
At the end of the story.
There's one hero.
Come on.
And he died for you already. Yes.
This is gospel.
Yes. There's one hero. And I think that's what's so liberating for men that actually grab hold of this hope in faith, is that you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, because someone already did. He loved the world so much that he carried that weight to the cross and disposed of it, and now gives us freedom, rest. All of you who are labored and are heavy laden, come to me and I'll give you rest. It's an invitation, right? And I think it's, as men, we have to now make a decision. Will we accept that invitation or not? And sometimes it's hard to drop this identity of, but I need to be that strong, man. I need to do this. I need to do that. When really, we don't have to. And for me, that was a struggle that I had. And I know we talked about it in the pre-chat. I went through a tough time where I lost my job. And for a whole year, I didn't know where my next check was coming from, because I didn't have a check coming. And I had a wife and 3 kids at the time, and all of those pressures of, you need to man up, tough up, you got to figure it out, you need to provide, you need to do this, you need to do that. All of that was there every single day. And during that time, I never forget, I was trying to figure out how am I going to pay for this bill and that bill and my rent. And there was a day where I remember I had just come home from a funeral, and someone called me, and he said to me, he's like, Matthew, I was just reading my Bible, and as I was reading my Bible, you just came before me, and I heard the voice of the Lord say, call him and tell him, don't think about it, pray about it. When he said that, like, it hit me. I knew exactly what it was for. And so I said, thanks for the word. And when I came off the phone, I remember I was laying down in my bed, and I was laying there, I was like, God, okay, I hear you. You said, don't think about it, pray about it. And I knew I was trying to figure out things in my own strength, being a man, right? That's what men do. But I stopped and I was like, God, I'm going to pause and not think about it, but I'm going to pray about it. And I was like, Lord, here's my bills, here's my rent. Can you please help me with that? Can you pay that for me? I don't have it. And literally within a few minutes, the phone rang and it was my cousin calling from Chicago. And I hadn't talked to him in I think 3 years at a time. We don't talk often. And so he calls and he's just talking about random things. And I'm thinking, why did you call? But he eventually says, listen, cousin, I just had this feeling that, came over me to just give you some money. He's like, I know we're men and we have pride, going back to what we spoke about earlier.
Right,
we have pride. He called it out because he knows it. It's common. He's like, we have pride. So if you don't want to accept it, he's like, I get it. That's fine. And I was like, cuz I have no pride. I was like, that pride is gone. Pride cometh before destruction. So I was like, I don't have any more pride. I'm here. And he's like, okay. He's like, can I send it right now? I was like, you surely can. And I shared with him what had just happened before the call. And he's like, wow, because I didn't even want to call at the time, but I just felt so strongly I had to. And so, we gathered it was of the Lord, and so he sent that, and it helped me, and I didn't, and I trained myself to not feel less than because I need help.
That's so good.
Because Jesus Christ, who is God manifested in flesh, came into a world where at every corner, at every turn, he needed help. He needed help to carry his cross. He needed help, in so many instances where to preparation for his burial. And he didn't keep everything bottled in. He invited his disciples to come with him. Yeah. He told them, I'm exceedingly sorrowful. In other words, I'm so low, I'm so burdened. It's almost like this depression, this weight is on me, and I'm sharing it. I'm letting you know, I'm inviting you into my pain. And so he was not afraid to ask for help. He was not afraid to express his pain. He wasn't so, in this facade that I'm God in flesh, I need to everyone needs to see me as unbothered. No, there's a quote from a lady named Brene Brown. She's like an expert on shame and studying shame. And she said that perfection is the enemy of expression. And so oftentimes men feel like we need to have everything perfect. And what that does is it's killing our expression. We're not able to express. We're not able to cry. God has given us a voice to cry, and he responds to the cry of his people because he wants us to be like that child. He wants us to be that one that says, listen, this is where I'm at. Be vulnerable, be open. And that's what Jesus modeled for us. So we have the strongest man ever showing us what it means to have true strength, to be vulnerable, right? And so I found for me during that time that it really helped take a weight off of me that it was just so heavy to bear. And that's what got me through each day of that year of being unemployed. And I would go into my prayer closet and just unload and say, God, this is how I feel. And I would tell myself, it's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to feel burdened and overwhelmed. It's okay. And I'm like, God, I need your help. That's so important for men to have an outlet where we can receive help and to share burdens.
Powerful, Matthew, powerful. As I said, I firmly believe that you are helping someone in this very moment through the word of that testimony. Help is available. Help is healthy. And help is your portion. I thank you so much for taking the time again to share your wisdom, your expertise, just your heart on this very important subject. I do believe that through your practice, you are also helping many, and there will be many more to come that you will be helping. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, and it is my prayer for you that the peace of God will be with you. Until we see you next time, may God bless you real good.